They threw me a party. Balloons, cake, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Everyone pretending the same script, like we were a family held together by frosting and forced hugs. I stood there, 25 candles flickering on top of a cake I didn't ask for, in a house filled with whispers I was never meant to hear. Mom kissed my forehead too quickly. Dad raised a glass too proudly. And all I could think about was how little they actually knew me. I had asked for nothing. No party, no gifts, no guests. I wanted to spend the day quietly, like I always did, reading, writing, walking in the woods near Grandpa's old barn. But they insisted like people trying to distract someone from a truth. My grandfather sat in the corner, alone, quiet, but his eyes never left me, not once. There was something heavy behind them, something that hadn't been there before, something ... waiting ... After the candles were blown, and the photos faked, I found him outside. He wasn't smoking, just standing under the porch light, hands trembling slightly, holding an envelope. "Happy birthday," he said, his voice rough like gravel. Then he handed me the envelope. I didn't open it right away, not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I already knew. Somewhere in my bones, I felt it. Something had been buried, something they'd kept from me, and tonight, it was clawing its way to the surface. I opened it in my old bedroom, a trust fund document, legal, stamped, sealed, date, 25 years ago, value, $3 million. Name, mine. But I never knew. Not a single word, not a single whisper. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the signature. My parents had signed as custodians, their names, bold and clear. For 25 years, they had controlled it. For 25 years, they never told me. I remembered the years they said we were struggling. When I wanted to go to art school and they said, "We can't afford it." When I worked 2 jobs and came home to unpaid bills. When they told me to be grateful, because not everyone is born lucky. Lucky, $3 million, hidden by the 2 people who claimed to love me most. Downstairs, laughter echoed, my name being called, the clink of glasses. I didn't go down. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I packed the document into my coat, walked quietly past the guests, out the front door, into the night. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply walked away. I came back 2 days later, not to speak, but to see . The house was still there, standing like it always had, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. The white paint on the porch rail had chipped further than I remembered. The wind chimes no longer sang, they clattered, confused, as if even the wind didn't know this place now. I had built this house before I had built anything else, brick by brick, month after month, saving every penny, laying each tile with my own calloused hands. My father had once said, "A man's home is his legacy." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Inside, the floorboards remembered my footsteps. The stairs still creaked where they always had, and the walls, they held echoes, not of arguments or silence, but of laughter. Children's laughter. I could still see them, barefoot, running through the hallway, hands sticky with jam, hair tangled from sleep. I'd chase them with a dish towel, pretending to be the monster that stole kisses and tickles. They'd scream and giggle, and I'd forget how tired I was from the night shift. In that same kitchen, I once fixed a broken pipe with duct tape and prayer, because we couldn't afford a plumber. I remember burning my hand on the old stove, trying to cook their favorite soup, because their mother was sick in bed, and someone had to keep them smiling. The dining table still stood, slightly wobbly, one leg shorter than the rest. We always meant to fix it, but we never did. It had scars from homework, from scissors, from birthday candles. Each mark told a story. Each dent had a name. I ran my hand across the surface. Dust had settled, not just on the wood, but on the memories. Their bedrooms were still there. Faded posters, toys left behind like relics from another life. I remember tucking them in, singing out-of-tune lullabies, waiting until they fell asleep just so I could collapse on the couch and breathe. This house knew how many nights I went without eating, just so they could have seconds. This house knew how many times I sold something of mine so they could go on a school trip, wear a new dress, or not feel left out. This house knew, even if they did in single quotes t. And now it was colder, not from weather, but from absence, from the weight of things unsaid, from the betrayal that leaked into the very foundation like a slow poison. It wasn't the trust fund, it was the lie, the silence, the rewriting of history, because I didn't just build this home, I built the people in it. I built their future while they buried mine. And yet, here it stood, this house that once hummed with life, Now, it felt like a museum, a sacred ruin, my fingerprints still etched into every surface, but their footsteps, long gone. It used to be filled with love. Now it only remembered me. There was a time I believed love was enough, enough to raise a family, enough to build a life, enough to protect what mattered most. I didn't count the hours I worked, just the meals they never missed. I didn't track the money I gave, just the shoes on their feet, the books in their bags, the smiles when birthdays came around. I remember standing in the pouring rain once, outside a second-hand bookstore, holding a list of university textbooks my daughter needed. The originals were too expensive. I found every last one, used and worn, with scribbles from strangers, and I wrapped them like gifts. She cried when I gave them to her, told me I was the best father in the world, and I believed it. I remember my son's graduation. I couldn't afford a new suit, so I patched the one I wore to my wedding, sat alone in the back row, smiling like a fool when they called his name. He looked right at me, raised his diploma, and mouthed, "For you, Dad." I clapped until my palms hurt. At her wedding, I walked her down the aisle, my little girl in white lace and borrowed earrings. I kissed her hand before placing it into another man's. She whispered, "Thank you for everything." I wanted to say, "It was never a debt." But I just nodded. That single quotes as the thing about love. Johnny, it's not just what you give, it's how quietly you give it. You sacrifice your nights, your dreams, your hunger, and you do it with a smile. Because that's what fathers do. They never saw the dreams I buried, the places I wanted to go, the art I wanted to make, the books I never wrote, the sleep I never got back. I gave it all, piece by piece, like bricks for their castle. Never asked for anything but presents. A call, a thank you, a little truth. But now, I see it clearly. They didn't just forget the giving. They rewrote it, repackaged my sacrifices as their own hard work, called themselves self-made, pretended they rose alone. And all that time, they held the key to a future they said we couldn't afford, a future I bled for. $3 million, not just hidden, used for comforts, for control, for silence, used to keep me believing we were struggling, while they were planning how to erase the man who made them. You can't put a price on love, but betrayal. Betrayal has a very specific invoice. It comes in the form of forgotten birthdays, missed calls, wiped memories, and envelopes with your name that arrive too late. They say love always costs something, and I paid in full. But what they took, they didn't just take what was mine, they took what I built for them. I didn't sleep that night, not because of anger, not even because of sadness, but because something inside me had awakened, a kind of quiet fire that doesn't burn, but calculates. I waited for the morning, not for them, but for the sunlight. I needed to see everything clearly. I started with the safe, the old iron one behind the bookshelf. They never knew I kept a duplicate key. I hadn't opened it in years, not since their mother passed. Inside, the air was still thick with old papers and fading ink. One by one, I unfolded the documents, birth certificates, tax returns, insurance papers, wills, and then, tucked behind a faded envelope, bank records, not mine. My name was listed as a grantor. Their names, beneficiaries, but there were withdrawals, regular ones, dates that aligned with moments I remember struggling, and they said we can't help right now, things are tight. They were never tight, not for them. I checked the property records, found the second mortgage I never signed. Turns out, I did, apparently. Forged, sloppy signature, my name, their handwriting. They never thought I'd look, but I did. I checked university payments, cross-referenced tuition with emergency loans they once asked for. They told me they were taking care of me while I was sick, but the receipts said otherwise. Spas, hotels, expensive restaurants. Once, I sold an heirloom watch, the last thing my father gave me, just so they could fix the roof. That roof was never touched, but their Instagram said New Year's Eve in Rome. I felt my breath tighten, not from surprise, but from recognition. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't an accident. This was architecture. Blueprint, betrayal. They had planned this, not recently, for years, slowly, strategically, while pretending to be my children. They were carving a path through everything I built, and I let them, because I believed, because I loved them. I stared at the numbers, the names, the lies dressed in legal language, all of it, wrapped in the illusion of family. I remembered every time I said, "I trust you." Every time I signed without reading, every time I thought, what's mine is theirs. And now, what's mine was theirs, but not because I gave it, because they took it. I sat back, let the documents fall to the table. They made a sound like falling leaves, or maybe crumbling faith. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The softness in my chest hardened. The warmth in my memories cooled. The father they knew, the gentle, weary man who smiled through pain. He took a step back, and someone else returned. Someone sharper, quieter. The man who once built a house with bare hands and no blueprint. The man who knew how to read between lines and see the cracks before walls fell. They thought I was weak. They forgot who taught them strength. I didn't tell anyone what I found. Not yet. Because revenge, true revenge, doesn't need an audience. It just needs time and precision. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My old friend, Amir. We had met in university. Before life pushed us down different roads, he had become a lawyer, a good one, a quiet one who knew how to work in shadows. He picked up on the first ring. Been a long time, he said. Not long enough, I replied. I need your help. I met him at his office, a small, neat place tucked behind a bookstore, filled with the smell of old wood and cold coffee. I handed him the envelope, then the forged documents, then the bank statements. He didn't interrupt, just read. His silence was louder than outrage. When he finally looked up, his eyes had changed. They used you, he said. I nodded. For years. You want this to go public? No, I said. I want it to be quiet, and legal, and irreversible. We spent hours piecing together a case, not just for theft, but for fraud. Not just for fraud, but for breach of trust. Amir pulled records I didn't even know existed. He knew where to look. Old transfers, co-signed authorizations, signatures on paperwork I never saw. Every page he found was a nail in the coffin of their version of the story. But it wasn't just about law, it was about strategy. I began speaking less, smiling less, watching more. I withdrew money from the accounts I still controlled, changed the will, redrafted the deed to the house. I reached out to a financial advisor, someone who owed me a favor, and we created something new, a foundation, one they couldn't touch. Not now, not ever. I moved the remaining assets into that foundation, under my name. The rules were simple. It would only activate when I passed, but none of it would go to them, not 1 cent. Instead, it would fund scholarships, meals, support for children raised by single parents, for those who grew up hearing no as their only answer, for kids like I once was, for kids like mine had never been. And something strange happened during all this. Johnny, I started breathing deeper, sleeping better, eating without bitterness in my mouth. It wasn't joy, but it was power. Not the loud, arrogant kind, but the kind that comes when you reclaim something that was stolen without shouting. That my children didn't know, not yet. They still smiled in their selfies, still posted birthday tributes with empty captions, still pretended we were close. Let them. Because I wasn't coming for them with fists. I was coming with facts. I was coming with law. I was coming with patience, the same patience I once used to raise them. They'd never see it coming. Revenge is loud only when done by fools. Mine would be silent. It didn't happen all at once. No great explosion. No breaking news. Just a slow unraveling, like thread pulling loose from a sweater. One fiber at a time. At first, it was whispers. Their business partner backed out of a major deal. Something about irregular accounting. A minor audit became a full-scale investigation. And while they smiled in public, behind closed doors, their panic grew teeth. Their nights became restless. I knew because the lights in their house stayed on longer than usual. The curtains no longer moved with ease. They were drawn tight, like secrets clinging to windows. The son who once mocked my budgeting skills suddenly began selling his watches. The daughter who once refused hand-me-downs now reused outfits. The storm had arrived, not with thunder, but with a silence that soaked everything. Credit cards stopped working, calls went unanswered, friends stopped visiting. Trust, like a fragile mirror, had begun to crack, not from outside forces, but from the weight of their own lies. I didn't gloat, didn't laugh, didn't even speak. I just watched. From a distance, from the old porch I had built with my bare hands, from the shadows they thought I had vanished into. And every time I looked up at the sky, I saw it reflecting them. A drought had begun, not of water, but of certainty. Every step they took sank deeper into the mud of their own design. I heard from a neighbor that they tried to mortgage a property, only to find out it was no longer theirs. I heard from Amir that legal notices were piling up on their doorstep like unpaid debts from karma. I saw, one afternoon, their once pristine car parked crooked near a pawn shop, and I smiled, not from cruelty, but from clarity. They hadn't just lost money, they had lost the illusion of control, of invincibility. Once, they moved through the world like nothing could touch them. Now, every phone call made them flinch. Every knock at the door sounded like judgment. And still, they didn't know it was me, because I hadn't raised a hand. I hadn't made a scene. All I did was remove the rug beneath their feet, and waited for gravity to do the rest. They had built their kingdom on sand, and now the tide was coming in. They whispered to each other in strained voices, tried to make plans, call in favors, scramble for answers, but the world wasn't listening anymore. Because once trust leaves, it takes the furniture with it. One night, I saw them outside a cafe. My daughter was crying, mascara trailing like black rain down her cheeks. My son paced, phone pressed to his ear, shouting at someone who had clearly stopped listening. They looked smaller than I remembered, not older, just reduced, like statues chipped by time and truth. And I stood across the street, invisible. I didn't wave, didn't move, didn't blink. They thought I disappeared. I was watching from the shadows. The knock came in the late afternoon. Not the hurried kind of guilt, not the angry slam of confrontation. No, this was the knock of hesitation, of people standing on the other side of the door rehearsing their lines, hoping I'd still answer like the man they used to manipulate. I didn't move right away. Let it ring out once, twice, then silence. And then again. 3 soft taps, as if the weight in their chests had started to spread to their knuckles. I opened it slowly. There stood my son, older than I remembered him looking, hair thinner, eyes darting like a boy caught stealing from his own pocket. Beside him, my daughter, dressed nicely, too nicely, like someone playing the role of concerned child for an audience that never arrived. "Dad," she said, and the word cracked like old porcelain. He cleared his throat. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside, not with warmth, not with welcome, but with silence, the kind that tells you, speak carefully. You're standing in the presence of someone who knows. They sat like strangers, one on the edge of the sofa, the other on the dining chair, the one with the cracked leg they never bothered to fix. "I know, things have been tense," my son began. He looked down as he said it, as if hoping his shoes might finish the sentence for him. My daughter nodded too quickly. "Been going through a lot." A pause, a breath, then came the tears, not sudden, not real, but trained, the kind that hoped to soften the ground before planting. Manipulation. Jachi reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo, us years ago, the 4 of us. It was worn, faded, folded too many times. She placed it on the table like an offering. "I miss this," she whispered. My son leaned forward, hands clasped, the kind of posture people use when begging for mercy in courtrooms. "We made mistakes, but we're still family, right?" I didn't speak, just let the silence stretch. Not as punishment, but as mere, let them hear their own words echo into the emptiness they'd carved. They began to shift, first guilt, then calculation. She reached out, lightly touched my arm. "We just need some help, a little support until things are better." There it was, the truth behind the visit, not reconciliation, not remorse, but rescue. I looked at their hands, trembling, nervous, rehearsed, and all I could think of was the paper trail they left behind, the forged signatures, the hollow birthdays, the dinners where I sat alone while they toasted each other with my sacrifices. Still, I said nothing, because I had learned something powerful in all this. People reveal more in silence than in speeches. They spoke for 27 minutes. I counted. They said "we" 32 times. They said sorry once. And not once did they say "what can we do for you?" When they finally fell quiet, waiting for a response, I stood up, walked to the window, looked outside. Rain was starting to fall, slow, gentle, unbothered, like the sky was washing its hands of something. I turned back to them, still said nothing. Because this wasn't about answers, this was about memory. I listened, not to forgive, but to remember their tone. I led them to the dining table, the same table where I once cut birthday cakes, helped with homework, paid bills late into the night so they wouldn't feel the weight. Now it would serve a different purpose, not for celebration, for confrontation. I placed a folder on the table, thick, organized, precise. No theatrics, no build-up, just the sound of paper meeting wood. What's that? My son asked, feigning confusion. I opened it, slowly, pulled out the first document, a copy of the trust, date, 25 years ago, beneficiary, me, custodians, them. My daughter's eyes blinked fast. My son tilted his head, like a man trying to play dumb through a migraine. Next came the bank transfers, each line highlighted, amounts, dates, expenses disguised as love. Rome, 2017. I said quietly, you told me you needed money for your child's school fees, but this shows hotel stays, champagne, jewelry. Dad, that's not. I raised one hand, not to silence, just to signal that I wasn't done. Next, the mortgage papers, my forged signature, side by side with my actual one. A forensic analyst had written a note confirming the forgery. You used my name. Signed papers I never saw. Mortgaged a house you didn't build. My daughter started to cry. Real this time, perhaps, but I had seen tears before. They no longer meant what they used to. My tone didn't change. Still level, still surgical. You told people I was being taken care of, that I was old, fragile, confused. But here are the recordings. I slid over a USB stick. Inside it, a conversation between them and a mutual friend, laughing about how they managed me, called me a liability with a long fuse. My son's lips parted, but no sound came. My daughter covered her mouth. The air in the room thickened like steam before a storm. Stayed calm. Not because it didn't hurt, but because now I controlled the pain. I shaped it, directed it, used it. This isn't about revenge, I said. This is about correction. I stood and walked to the old cabinet near the window. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out one final envelope. Legal, sealed, heavy, a revised will, I said. Signed, witnessed, protected. They looked at each other like soldiers hearing the gates locked behind them. The house is no longer in my name. The assets are protected. The foundation is registered. The law is in motion. My daughter opened her mouth to speak. We were scared. We didn't know what else to do. I nodded. You did what you were taught. My son frowned. By who? By me, I said. I taught you how to plan, how to read people, how to be quiet until it's time to move. I leaned slightly forward, voice low. I just never thought I'd be your target. Silence again, but this time it didn't belong to me. I pushed the folder toward them. Take your time. Read it all. No need to rush. They stared at the mountain of truth between us. Paper, ink, recordings, timelines, and still. My tone never wavered, because power doesn't need volume. Let's discuss, I said finally, folding my hands, how you'll make things right. We didn't go to court. I didn't want the headlines. I didn't want the eyes of the world watching me teach my children a lesson they should have learned at the dinner table. But that didn't mean they walked away, untouched. Amir helped draft a binding agreement, terms carved not out of rage, but out of mathematics, cold, exact, undeniable. They would repay what they stole, not all at once, but in installments. Each month, a reminder, not just of the debt, but of who they owed it to. The foundation was named after their mother. She had always wanted to help children read. Now, thanks to their betrayal, hundreds would. My daughter resisted at first. Tears. Please, I can't afford this, she whimpered. I said softly, you could afford Rome. My son tried to negotiate. This feels like punishment. No, I said, this is responsibility. They signed. Slowly, each stroke of the pen heavier than the last. I didn't smile, didn't celebrate. I only watched them finish what they started, this time, in my presence. A public letter followed, not to the world, to the community, to the very people they used to impress with stories of their hard work and struggles. It was short, but honest. They admitted the truth, that I had supported them, that the funds they used were not earned, but inherited and hidden, that they had, in their words, lost their way in the fog of entitlement. It wasn't enough, but it was necessary. People talk, and when they talked this time, they didn't praise the children. They respected the parent. They avoided me in public now, not out of shame, but out of unfamiliarity. They no longer knew who I was, because for the first time, I was not bending, not forgiving, not forgetting. I was the mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. Friends of theirs stopped calling. Doors they used to walk through closed, not because of scandal, but because people recognize when a story changes its narrator. And me, I found peace in structure. A chair by the window, morning coffee, at the same time, letters from the foundation arriving every week, Photos of smiling children, thank you cards, written in crooked handwriting. One read, "Thank you for believing in someone you've never met." I kept that one pinned to the fridge. My daughter once asked, "Is there any chance this can go back to how it was?" I looked at her gently. No, because how it was built on a lie. She looked down, whispered, "I'm sorry." "I know," I said, "but mercy isn't free." My son asked if I still loved them. I nodded. "But love isn't blindness." He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to bargain with. No leverage, no guilt, no illusion, just the truth. Forgiveness has an invoice, and they paid in silence, not money. The rain had returned, not the violent kind, just a quiet drizzle, the kind that kissed the windows and made the earth smell like beginnings. I sat by the window with a blanket draped over my legs, the steam from my tea curling into the air like smoke from old wounds. I didn't need to be anywhere, didn't need to say anything. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine, outside. The trees danced slowly, no longer bending under storm, but swaying with breath. The wind no longer howled, it hummed. I reached for the drawer beneath the old lamp and pulled out the photo they'd left on my table. Weeks ago, the one they brought with trembling hands and cracked voices. It was us. Years ago, I looked at my younger self, tired eyes, soft smile, arms wrapped around two children who had not yet learned the language of betrayal. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I simply ran my thumb across the corner, tracing the face of their mother, the only one in that picture who never broke a promise. She would have understood all this, would have told me to protect myself, would have said, "Love them, but don't let them take you with them when they sink." I folded the photo once, placed it in a small tin box, and tucked it away, not out of bitterness, but because even memories need boundaries. The house was quiet again, not empty, just still, and I had grown to love the stillness. Letters from the foundation arrived weekly now. One came this morning. A child who had learned to read wrote me a poem about stars. It wasn't perfect, but it was more honest than anything my children had said in years. Sometimes, when I walk past the mirror, I see someone else, someone older, yes, but not broken, not bitter. Someone who stood up after being buried alive in silence, and chose not to scream, but to speak only when it mattered. I don't hear from them much anymore. An occasional message, a forwarded birthday wish. Sometimes they ask if they can visit, sometimes they do. We sit, we talk, but something between us remains untouched, not out of anger, but understanding. They know now. They know this peace wasn't gifted. It was earned, painstakingly. And the door that once opened for them without question, now waits, quiet, strong. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering without letting the memory rot you from the inside. Some nights, I sit on the porch and stare at the stars. I talk to her, my wife, tell her I finally did it, that I said it all right, that I saved what mattered. And then I whisper, "They tried to erase me." And I imagine her smile, soft, certain. "They wanted me gone," I say. "Now they can't move without me."